Welcome to the podcast, Christine. I am really excited because I've been in your space for, I don't know, it's been a while. I love that you're helping people realize that there's this other side of podcasting where you don't have to be a host, but you can leverage this beautiful platform to get your stories out in the world. So, welcome.
Thank you. I am so honored to be here.
I'm really excited. And we have to start back from the beginning because I think that you're like the queen of podcast guesting. I'm just going to say it. I've heard your name dropped a lot in my communities. And when you started, your very first pod experience was done in an L&D bed. And I want to have a little bit of conversation around this because I think it's important to know that if we show up to serve, big things can happen.
Mm. Oh gosh. Yeah, that's so true. I mean, I had no idea when I recorded my first podcast interview that I would fall in love with it, that it would eventually become my entire business, and that it was possible for me to record and to create content under some really life or death circumstances, essentially. I mean, I was in a triage labor and delivery bed, double high risk because of my age and because of my history. And I had been sent up there for additional monitoring from a regular appointment near the end of my pregnancy with my now almost 7-year-old. And I, it was a terrifying moment. I was dealing with PTSD. I was dealing with anxiety. And I was also watching the clock going, this is on my calendar. Can I make it? Will I be able to make it? I hate to reschedule at the last minute. And it all worked out. And I was able to record it laying there strapped in and hooked up to all the things. And it gave me energy to connect and serve in that way at a time in my life that I personally really needed it. Like, I had this really intense thing happening in my body, in my personal life, and I was still able to show up and serve and give and receive in that exchange. And so it put me on this path, having that experience in that way.
I think you bring up a really good point that I'm starting to see like a theme when I talk to podcasters is that serving and being able to show up, share your story, that connection can get us through some of the darkest and the happiest times of our life. It's not just about building a business, there's this emotional piece too.
Totally. I mean, I think you and I have this. I mean, it's in your last name, right? Like, you have a dragon in your last name. That's pretty cool. I talk to my kids about dragons and how I believe they're real. And as healers, light workers, way showers, people who are really of service, like however you identify, heart centered, right? I think that one of the reasons that I'm in love with this platform, having participated in all of them over the last 24 years, is that there is such potential for healing, for deep, true connection, for very authentic conversations that, oh, by the way, also happen to be very leveraged and evergreen and algorithm proof and all of these things that I think as spiritual people, we can struggle finding the balance between, or the combination that feels right, of strategy and of service, or any other words, right? Living in the 3D, living in 5D, the 7D, whatever. And this to me is that, because it creates this beautiful space for us to share, to connect, to exchange energy, right? And to do that in a way that really is not happening or possible, that I see, given the nature of social media.
Oh, yeah. It is truly podcasting saved my life. I have my own unique story of how it saved my life. And it's just that piece of connection is like nothing else. There is no other way that I have found in my personal and in my business life to connect like I do through a podcast.
Mhm. And I love that you have aligned your business to really be centered around podcasting, right? And helping others to share their stories through your own platform and then also helping others bring their own shows to the world, right? And taking away some of the overwhelm that causes pod fade, right? Because my background as a student and as a professor and as a freelancer, a business owner is in production. I am probably one of the few people who knew what I was getting into to the with starting my own podcast to the point that I waited years to do it because I knew how much work it is to produce a weekly show or a biweekly show, right? Even if it's audio only. And unless you really enjoy editing, it's a real consideration, right? So it's so important to have people like you who are taking that off of our plate and bringing these messages to the world in a professional way that allows them to be consumed. Because if the audio is not good or the whatever's not good or blah 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 blah, blah, right, it creates friction, and that makes everything that you're doing with your podcast harder. So I appreciate I appreciate you doing that work.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate what you're doing because this is something that I need to step into is so I have done so much production between my clients. I have this show, I have another show that I produce. So I'm producing 3 to 4 episodes of my own plus 27 podcast episodes for my clients. So I spend a lot of time on the production side. But when I see the growth and I see the things that people are like, I want to grow, I want to get in front of new audiences, I see them bringing guests onto their show and never really pitching themselves to go to other shows. And I think this is one of the places we burn out because not every guest is a great guest. Not every guest is going to share. Not every guest you get high profile guests, you're not even going to show up on the list when because you think that's a Google search. So I want to know in this journey of yours, you decided to go into the guesting side. So helping people show up as a good guest, serve with story so that they're not, I call them the skeezy sales, but using story to connect through guesting. So how did you end up going from host to really leaning into, okay, let's leverage being a guest on other shows too to create these connections?
I started as a guest. So I was, I think, on like over 100 podcasts before I ever started my own. Yeah. And so I did it the opposite of the way most people do it. And that was because I was super clear that until I figured out how to commit to my own podcast in a way that felt good with first one, then two, tiny human, and running a business, and I wasn't going to do it. Like, I'm like pretty type A, pretty high achieving, like to the point of pathology. Like, these are the things Christine is working on healing, right? Is like, I jokingly say that control is my pathological love language. Like, I really like to pretend that I'm in control. And I keep getting loving reminders that my like life lessons are trust and faith and annoying things like that are like really important. Yeah. And also dark humor is a sign of resilience. So there you go. I I think that while I have overcommitted in a lot of other areas, not understanding what I was taking on, this is one where I knew what I was, at least for the production side of it. So what I did as a guest was and you could do this if you're a host, is I was using every experience to note what I enjoyed and what I didn't about the way someone's podcast was set up. Oh, I really love how they do this. I definitely don't want to do that. Right. And I was enjoying every interview and I was noting, wow, that really stands out to me. That was really cool. Or that seems like overcomplicated. And so in the process of just being a guest, I was developing my own, here's how I want to do my own podcast. And a lot of people were telling me along the way, you should have your own podcast. You should have your own podcast. I'm like, I know. I love to interview as much as I love to be interviewed. And I wanted to do my best to prevent pod fade before it started. Right. So I think if you're sitting as a host going, how the heck do I integrate guesting on top of everything else that I'm doing with my own podcast? I think the frame that I would offer is I have I have been taught by people like JLD. I know is I'm honored to also be a fellow guest along with him on this podcast, that guesting is the number one way to grow your own podcast. And so if you are putting in all of the work to have your own podcast, and of course you want to grow it, which is probably at least part of the reason why you're listening to this episode, then then perhaps there is nothing more leveraged that you could do than to be a guest. Because, oh, by the way, it also creates so much content for you wherever else you're active on the interwebs.
Oh, yeah. And I think so for me, one of my strategies, I've been, like I said, been in your space. I've finally, I want to like say, like, took the bite of the queendom apple. And I'm like, okay, I have been doubling down on all of these methods that don't work. So when we start looking at the back end production thing, okay, I'm going to talk from take my host hat off, put the producer hat on. All my clients are wanting me to create all these social media assets, all these things. And I'm like, if you took the time that those hours that I spend doing that and you paid me to help you get on other shows, we're actually going to get a bigger reach from my understanding. I know from my personal, like, I have not been on many shows, but that's what I'm seeing is that it is busy. There's a lot of busy work on the back end of producing. But if we leverage this guesting thing, we can actually get bigger reach for probably the same amount of time or less, plus create an awesome, amazing network of humans to connect with.
Whoa, that's really powerful. And like high new like income stream, service to offer, way to serve your clients at an even higher level. Like I could jam out on that with you forever. So I love that.
I'm like, and it just dawned on me right now. It's like, okay, what you said makes so much sense is because that we're trained. It's what's in the marketplace. Go on social media, create these audiograms that don't work. I'm not even get started down that rabbit hole, but like do all these things. And it's like, if you take the time, especially for those independent podcasters that are producing, and spend some time with somebody like you who can help them be an amazing guest, and the pitching thing, like all of these pieces, again, not the expert. I am terrible at it, but again, we're all a work in progress, which is why I'm really excited about this conversation. So I want to dig in a little bit of like, okay, now we know we might give up some of these other strategies and double down, or at least put that time into guesting. Where do we even start? Do we just start like throwing out some emails, I guess? Like, how do we create that connection so that people aren't like, no, 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 no.
Yeah. Okay, this is a great question. And I'm going to answer it with something that somebody who like Evans Putman, who sold his podcast like for an undisclosed sum, right? Exited his podcast because it was profitable enough for him to sell. He told me he'd never heard this before. And he's like the guy when it comes to like ethically monetizing your own podcast. I want to get this out there to everybody. You ask what I call your clonable clients what they listen to. So I am making an assumption here that you have clients of some kind, right? That if you're listening, I'm talking about being a service provider, whether you produce podcasts for other people or whether you're a coach, a speaker, a consultant, a web designer, right? That you have clients and you have some clients, or you've at least had one client that you love. right? And so when you think about that client, if you could clone them and you could have a business full of humans like that person or those people, go to them and ask them and tell them that. Tell them, I love you. I would love to have more people like you. First of all, that's going to, if you're a person who's of service, like that's going to strengthen the relationship between you and that client, is you being authentic and genuine and telling them that, because that client is going to be honored to hear that. I mean, I love to hear, like, you're my ideal client, right? Ask them to just screenshot where they listen, Spotify or Apple Podcasts, right? The biggest ones, just screenshot what they follow, what they listen to on a regular basis. This takes all of the overwhelm out of, there are 3.1 million podcasts including, where the do I start? Right? And even if it's like the biggest podcast on the planet and or it's not relevant to you, awesome. Because guess what? People listen to things other than just to grow their business or other than just what they're into. And often my clients will come to me and be like, I'm so surprised. I went on this podcast with like zero attachment just to talk about how this relates to my life or my lifestyle or whatever, my faith, something that I had in common with the host, and I got clients from it. And I say, yeah, often those have the biggest ROI because you're not one of many. You're not one of many business coaches or podcast producers or whatever. It's like, no, you're the only one who's been on that podcast. And you have something in common with the audience, right? So it's this real personal connection, which is how we hire service providers, coaches, experts, right? A lot of the time, most of the time. So ask your people where they're listening. And if it's huge shows that you're like, I'm too intimidated or they don't accept guests, then look at the similar shows, the recommendations people also listen to. Listen Notes has one of those. Apple has one of those. Spotify has one of those. They're all different because they all have their own algorithm. So even just if you have one podcast from one client, you're going to wind up with like at least 15 podcasts that are related to it. That is a list for you to start from.
Wow. I'm like, can you see my wheels spinning? I'm like, oh my goodness, this makes so much sense. And I think this is why I have the two shows, because they're the same, but so different. Because the other one is like niche adjacent. Like in my neighborhood could come to my block party, but definitely not the person. And I think what you just said, this is why your superpower is translating that expertise into a story. And I read that on your website. I had to write it down. It's actually on my computer, and that's why it came to me so quickly. And I'll be the first to admit that, because when I read that, I was like, this is it. Your expertise is not just that one thing, it's the story behind that expertise that allows you to bring in the people, which is why you stepped into guesting. And I'm like, yes, I'm so for this. And you've created an amazing method. And I want to hear, like, how did this birth the Powerhouse podcast guesting method? I mean, it's called the Powerhouse, so we know you're bringing it.
It's actually something that I've been thinking about over the past few days because I just had a friend catch up with the amazing human who helped me bring it to the world. So I was doing this thing and I'd been on over 100 podcasts and it was a pure joy for me. Like it was a flow activity. It's energizing to me. And so I was dedicating time and effort, energy to it. And then people started, like hosts and some influencers, like business coach type influencers, started reaching out to me and saying, like, you do this differently and would you come teach it? And I was helping mission driven folks, mostly women at the time, to figure out what it was that they wanted to do, quit their jobs, replace their incomes, and make their first six figures. And I loved that work. And it combined all of the things, right? Being a professor, being a marketer, being like a career counselor, all of this stuff that I had done in previous lives. And so being a storyteller, right? And so I had joined a mastermind to help me grow that business. And the folks in that mastermind, which they were helping people go from 6 to 7 figures, folks in that mastermind, they came to me and they asked me to teach all of their clients what I was doing. And every time someone asked me to teach these things, I was kind of like, I really, really, really thought, and I think this is probably true for a lot of us. We all go through this when we're like, this is easy for me. Why would anyone pay me? Right? This is the thing. What? I mean, I could do this all day, every day in my sleep for free. Right? So they came to me and I was like, I'm just being a good person. Apparently, people need to be taught how to be a good person. I don't know. But like when it comes to podcast guesting, I was like, this seems to me like obvious what any human with like the values of being a good service-based human would do. Well, apparently it wasn't obvious, obviously. Right. So the creative director of that company, his name is Avery Ford. I love you, Avery, with all my heart. He said, you know what? Let me help you turn this into something that fits a webinar teaching masterclass type of model. I will help you do that so that you can bring it to more people. You can bring it to our clients mainly, right? And then I'll give you the slides and you can take it and do with it what you want. And so that was really how it came to be. It started as like me just going, these are some strategies. And then it kind of became this more cohesive thing. And then these people who really believed in me also held my little feet to the fire and said, like, you've got to launch this. You've got to do something with this. Like I was comfortable. I loved what I was doing. And they were like, this is something like JLD said this to me. You are literally the best in the world at this. Like and then I almost passed out when he said that, like passed out and threw up at the same time. Right. I was like, right. And I had to sit with it. I definitely like almost threw up about it a bunch of times, got real lightheaded. And this is a very long answer. That's the truth, is that it took a lot of getting out of my own way, which I think we all as humans, most of us, have this resistance to change, right? And also like I didn't have a model for how, like I have plenty of business coaching models, right? There was no model for teaching podcast guesting. There were and are agencies, and that wasn't my model. That isn't my model. That is not the way that I am best. It's not my highest and best. And like most of those people are my friends and I love them. And it's not how I'm wired, right? I've run an agency
Yeah.
before
Mhm.
and I pivoted from that for a reason. So all that to say, a lot of help, a lot of belief. And then it became like a lot of education because we still get a lot of people just wanting us to do it for them. In fact, we had somebody on the phone with us last week who has the money, has the credibility, has the product, and was like, please, 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 will you just do it for me? I don't want to do it. I don't want my team to do it. I don't want to touch it. And we said, no, we will not take your money. Let us make you a referral because guess what? What I teach does not work completely done by me instead of with you involved. And so it's been challenging. And it's because it's only for certain people. And most people want our results, but they don't want to do the work. And it doesn't work. So a lot of support, a lot of help, a lot of belief, and then a lot of reminding myself like who I'm for, because I have seen how these conversations have been healing for me, have been healing for the hosts that are on the other side of it, have been healing for the people that I've taught and the hosts that they've shared their message with. And I'm like, that's what I'm here to do. Of all the things I could be doing, I'm not chasing Team USA basketball around the globe, broadcasting the Olympics anymore. Like, I'm taking a stand for these humans who are like elevating humanity and consciousness. And that's not for everybody. And that's cool, right? This is a really, really long answer, longer than I normally give. There you go.
But I love it, and you've said so many things here that were like, I hope people heard. Like, you were in something successful. You leaned into this next level thing. You're also saying no to those clients that are like, "Here, just take my money," because it's not aligned. These are all things that I think, I mean, they stand out to me, meaning it stands out to someone else, that we need to hear. You don't have to take every person. Keep aligned with yourself, keep aligned with your values, and I think this is why you're doing it different, and why, like, as I follow you, I'm like, "Okay, I do need to lean in." And I also notice as a podcast host that I probably get pitched by some of the people that you've taught because they're coming from them, not an agency. I love my agencies out there. Power to you. You guys are doing great, but it's not personal. And podcasting is so stinking personal that these blanket things, I'm just, no, I want to hear from the person.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, understand that there comes a point in business when we want to delegate things. And in this case, the way that I think about guesting is starting a long-term relationship. And if you are looking for somebody to date, yes, people hire matchmakers at a certain level of income, at a certain level, right? A lot more people use the apps, and that's for a reason. It is, or even if you don't use the apps, it's like personal connections, right? And really, if we zoom out to the common thread of this business being about podcast guesting and the way that my core values are like relationships and connections, right? I'm a connector. I love to do that. I love to build community. I love having real relationships with people that I resonate with. And that's my favorite part about doing business. And so that is I'm teaching people how to build real win-win-win relationships through this platform. And that cannot be outsourced. And if you don't see the value of it, then that's okay too. Right?
Yeah. And sadly, I mean, here I am 3.5 years into my podcast journey, and I didn't see the value in it. I saw the value of bringing guests in and trying to like nurture those relationships, but I nurtured with the wrong people, the people that were just there to use my platform. And I love that you're teaching people, no, this is like heart centered. This is soul centered. This is about connection. And it's not just here, promote my thing, dump and go. I mean, the dump and go, it's a lot of work for a host to put it out first off, but you've also missed that opportunity to come to the block party.
Yeah. It's transactional. And this is tricky because as we grow our businesses, I was just talking with one of my coaches about this morning. It's like I have this thing where it's like I get upset when we talk about people as numbers because to me people are souls, right? And she was saying, I get it, right? Also, it's about when we use numbers to improve our clients' experience, to improve the quality of our podcast so that we can reach more people, right? I was like, yeah, I get on board with that. Got it done, right? So it's just like none of any of this is good or bad. It's just how does it align with my way of being, with my way of building a business? And to your point, there are a lot of people who teach and have systemized this idea of as a host, interview your ideal clients. Or I actually have somebody in my DMs right now who is the human who teaches, who started all of that. And he's trying to get me on his podcast. And I'm not going to name names, but I'm like, I see you, sir. And I know what's going to happen, right? Because I know the people who are just churn and burn, interview as many guests as they can because they count on a certain percentage of them turning into some kind of sale. And then on the other side, I know plenty of people who are trying to do that as guests, right? And it comes across, it's really obvious, it's really cheesy or skeezy, as you say, and it usually feels full of ego. So it doesn't work for anybody. It must work for somebody, but it doesn't work for the kind of people that I'm here to serve. So it takes all types, right? And it's easier to churn and burn in the short term than it is to build relationships. But at some point, you get a reputation for doing that. And then when you slide into somebody like my DMs, I know what you're up to, right? And I'm not here for it. Word gets around, right? So if
Mhm.
you want to be in business for the long term, you got to decide how you want to do that and what you want to be known for.
Oh, okay. So if you do say yes, I would love for you to share that interview because it will be juicy and fire filled. Because the original, I mean, I'm one of these people that's like, oh, I love a juicy conversation. Like, just like, okay, yeah, bring it, buddy. I want to see if you even are willing to produce and publish this. But again, that's my little feisty dragon in me nature. I'm like, I see what you're doing. Let me flip
Yep.
the switch on you. And
I
I
coached
love
a
that you're
client through it already. Like she was on that pod and she was real honest and blunt about what she saw happening. But I think a lot of people don't know. And that's my problem with it is that it's a bait and switch. You flatter people and
yeah,
you tell them like, oh, I want to have you on my podcast. And then there's no consent to sell. It was all a ploy. And that's BS to me because they thought that they were going to have an authentic conversation with you and be shared on your platform. And that was just something that was a hook to get you in the door. And if you tell them up front they're going to be pitched, it's a totally different conversation. But you're also not going to get as many people saying yes.
yeah,
So hence they don't.
yeah. And I think that's one of the things I think it's done a disservice to people that are like heart centered, very intuitive, sensitive like me, because now I go so far the opposite way.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my gosh, don't pitch, don't pitch, don't pitch, don't say
Yes.
anything, don't say anything. And we hold ourselves back. So this is like a beautiful like transition here of like, okay, well, we've seen so much of this other bait and switch. Where's the balance?
I can be really, really good at getting up in my head. I say like living next, right? Is like, I think that especially those of us who have dealt with anxiety and perfectionism and all of that, like control, a desire for control, we can, we can overthink and overthink and overthink, right? And in the past, I would say I had a lot more like attachment to what someone was going to think of. What has really helped me is coming back to like checking in with my gut and my heart and going like, what, what have my values changed? Am I now like a transactional, broy human? Am I like, we've all done stuff that later we're like, I feel really gross about that because someone else taught us it and promised us that it would make us millions of dollars. Like we've all done it. No shame. Later, we're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that. And we learned from it, right? The thing to check in with for me has been if my values are still the same, then I know the place that this is coming from. If I can say that I genuinely, whatever it is, feel like I can help someone, want to support them, whether it's like through me working with them or promoting them or whatever, then that's what I can rest in. And other people might judge it or run it through their perception. And I think we all have sales trauma, right? From being sold to in a way that, and listen, I know the difference between big T and little T trauma. I'm in a trauma healing program. I've got my own, right? Like, and in this space, that's a real thing where we have been sold to in a way that has felt terrible to us or whatever. And so I think the thing is, are you in alignment with your values? Knowing that as much as we might resist it, like, yeah, we're human. Like, I might just be learning how to be a human at 41 now because I like spent most of my life being like, yeah, that's for everybody else, not for me. But can I trust that I was doing my best and coming from a place of service? And I'm figuring out how to do that. And it's probably going to be messy at the beginning, just like watching my kids learn to walk. And as much as we hear that metaphor, it takes a while to learn a new skill. sales is a skill, podcast guesting is a skill, podcast hosting is a skill, and we're all learning it. And part of like what you're doing here, which is so beautiful, is like you're helping people get better at this skill of podcasting and keeping on going because you are getting traction. And part of that is learning. Okay, we're not doing audiograms because those don't move the needle. Okay, we should really be being a guest first, right? And also realizing that like one awkward practice sales conversation or like dipping a toe in the water is not going to be the make or break for your business. It might just be something that like your nervous system needs to build more trust in that you're not actually going to die when those words come out of your mouth. Ask me how I know.
I haven't died yet, right? I'm like, "Oh, man," I did so many of, like, images of like, "Oh, yeah. Oh, I didn't die. I made it. I survived." So, with the guessing thing, I also think that it's important to have mentors, like you're talking about, you're on different programs and stuff. So, how can we get into your guesting space, like, to be a better guest, to show up in the right ways, to not be these skeezy things, and to not be that person that's just coming on to be transactional?
Well, thank you for asking that. One of the biggest fallacies that I see a lot is people feeling like the bigger the show, the better the the outcome as a guest. Like, I don't have much time, so I'm just gonna go on only the biggest shows that I can possibly get on, and the rest of them aren't worth my time. And so I really challenge that belief because that has not been my experience. It has not been my client's experience. And so, like, to answer your question, I have a free training that you can grab, which is probably a great, like, really tangible extension of this conversation. And it's called Small Pod, Big Profit. And you can, like I said, it's free. You can get it at lifewithpassion.com/profit. And I mean, obviously, this is our whole business, right? We've got stuff. And what's most important to me is that there's resonance, right? So I feel like that's a really good way to like check out some of our strategies and see if they resonate, because ultimately you'll only do the work working with somebody if you resonate and align with them. Otherwise, it doesn't matter how much you show up or how much you invest or whatever. You have to be open to learning the new skill. So I think that's a great entry point.
Okay. We'll make sure to put all that information in the show notes because we've been having this conversation. It is so different because I've had some conversations with agencies with different kinds of ways to be a guest. And the way that you're presenting this is like, it is like nothing else that's being taught on the market that I have seen. And I go pretty deep into the podcasting space because I love podcasting. I'm like, why are people not using this legacy platform to make change in the world? Come on, people. Like, get behind the mic.
I love that. Yes.
We're talking about pod fade. We're going to start allocating some of that time we're spending on social media marketing that is not working, and we're going to start putting it into guesting. But what is your, like, being in the industry for so long, being part of podcasting, making a change in it? What is your ingredient you want to add to the cure for pod fade?
I believe that if we have ever been a guest, and I will add, and or done solo episodes. If you're listening to this, you're probably a podcast host or you're looking to be a successful long-term podcast host, right? You're preventatively curing yourself of pod fade, right? I believe that those of us who are drawn to this platform are great at expressing ourselves verbally. If writing, I mean, I've written a book, I've done all the things. If writing was our primary thing, then we would be over there doing that. We wouldn't be here. So it can prevent pod fade. It can make you a ton of money if you will allow yourself to let it be easy by taking what is probably already your best stuff. Even if you're like sitting there in your head being like, it's not my best stuff. I was new to it. I see you. I love you. And this is the invitation to do it anyway.
And you might be surprised by the things that you hear yourself say. I know when I go back and I'm listening, I'm like, man, I was so smart there. What happened?
Yep.
I absolutely love that. And I will be sure to get all your information in the show notes because everybody listening now is probably like, okay, I am going to allocate some time to being a good guest because this is where we can truly grow our show. So thank you so much for taking your time to share with us, to inspire us, and to share that we can show up as we are and still make big what I call tsunamis in the world.
Yes. Yes. It really is enough. And this industry, there's so much opportunity, so much possibility, right? Like you have your ways of helping people. I have my ways of helping people. Everybody who wants to enter or continue to be in the industry in any way, there's so much possibility and potential. And to take your gosh, someone said this to me yesterday. Take your business, take your idea from infancy to infinite. So keep listening here, right? Because I've been listening. These conversations are gold. They're super practical. I'm very honored to be a part of them. And keep showing up and create space to let it be simpler with what you're already doing.